So I want you listening right now to just kind of imagine standing in the absolute finest, most affluent neighborhood of a major global economic superpower.
Right. Picture like the absolute peak of luxury,
Exactly. Picture this massive multi-story brick mansion. It's overlooking a really prestigious canal, and you are holding the deed to this property.
which is worth a staggering amount of money.
Oh, and an unbelievable sum of wealth. So imagine handing over that deed. You are literally signing away your home. And in exchange, the buyer, they don't hand you chests of gold.
Oh.
They don't transfer funds into your bank account. They hand you an onion.
Or, well, a dusty little root that basically looks exactly like an onion.
Right. You take this little bulb, you put it in your pocket, and you just walk away from your mansion, fully believing you just made the greatest financial transaction of your entire life.
It's almost hallucinatory to try and process that image.
It totally defies all modern financial logic. But I mean, this is the imagery we are universally fed when we talk about the legendary Tulip Mania of 1637.
The ultimate cautionary tale.
Exactly. Today, our deep dive is wading right into this story. It's universally cited as this massive cautionary tale of human greed, the story of the Dutch Republic going entirely insane over a flower, leading to this catastrophic, nation-destroying economic crash.
And we are going to examine the historical accounts of that 17th century market, but we're primarily contrasting two very different texts today, right?
Yes, exactly. We're looking at this massive collision of two completely different approaches to history.
Right. So on one hand, we have Charles Mackay's wildly influential book from 1841. It's called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds.
Which is a fantastic title, by the way.
Oh, it's brilliant. And this is the text that effectively cemented the legend of Tulip Mania into the global consciousness.
Right.
But then on the other hand, we have the modern, painstakingly rigorous archival research of historian Anne Goldgar, specifically her book Tulip Mania, Money, Honor, and Knowledge in the Dutch Golden Age.
So, our mission today is to uncover what genuinely took place in the smoky taverns of 17th century Holland.
Yeah, to figure out the actual truth.
We want to understand the bizarre biological reality behind the flowers themselves and really explore how a sensationalized legend completely strangled the historical truth.
Because the story of how we actually got this story is, frankly, it's astounding.
It's so wild. So let's begin with the myth itself. I want to lay out the tall tale we have all been sold, the one that ends up in literally every economics textbook.
Right, so the popular narrative sets the stage in the 1630s. This is during the absolute peak of the Dutch Golden Age.
And the Dutch Republic is just booming, right?
Oh, massively.
Hmm.
They have the Dutch East India Company pulling in astronomical wealth from the spice trade.
Great.
So there is this new, incredibly affluent merchant class. And according to the legend, this sudden influx of wealth triggered a society-wide psychological break centered entirely around tulips.
Like a total mass hysteria.
Exactly. The story Mackay popularized claims that everyone, and he meant literally everyone, caught the tulip fever.
And we aren't just talking about wealthy merchants looking for a status symbol to put in their gardens, right?
No. The legend insists that, weavers stepped away from their looms, bakers let their ovens go cold.
It's crazy. Chimney sweeps, literally covered in soot, were supposedly liquidating their meager life savings to buy flower bulbs.
It implies a total collapse of the social hierarchy.
Right.
The narrative suggests that carpenters and sailors were suddenly rubbing elbows with these patrician elites. And they were all united by this singular manic desire to trade bulbs that were still buried under the frozen ground.
With prices supposedly doubling every few days.
Yeah. And Mackay includes these deeply vivid, almost cinematic anecdotes to drive home the sheer scale of the madness.
Oh my gosh, the sailor anecdote. I read that in the source material, and it is just staggering.
It really is the crown jewel of Mackay's narrative.
Oh, it's so good. Walk us through it.
So the story goes that a wealthy merchant had a staggeringly valuable tulip bulb sitting on the downer of his counting house.
Okay.
And a visiting sailor who had just returned from a really long voyage comes into the office. He sees the bulb, mistakes it for a common onion, slips it into his pocket, and goes down to the docks to eat it with his lunch of pickled herring.
He ate a fortune with his fish.
Yes. The legend claims that single bulb was worth enough to feed his entire ship's crew for a full year.
That is, it's hard to even wrap your head around. And Mackay says the merchant was furious. Right?
Oh, apoplectic. Mackay tells us the merchant was so angry he had the sailor thrown in prison for months over a digested flower.
Wow.
And then the legend moves to its inevitable third act, which is the catastrophic crash in 1637.
Right, the bubble bursts.
Overnight, fortunes evaporate into thin air. The narrative claims the entire Dutch nation was plunged into a crippling, prolonged economic depression.
And there are all these images of ruined men.
Right. Yeah. Men utterly destroyed by their own hubris,
Yeah.
supposedly throwing themselves into the freezing canals of Amsterdam to drown rather than face their creditors.
I mean, when you look at why this specific narrative arc is so universally repeated, it's pretty clear it functions as a perfect morality play.
Oh, absolutely. It hits all the right psychological buttons.
Right, it hits all the sweet spots. It's a parable about the sin of greed, the dangers of gambling, and, the hubris of stepping out of your social station.
Exactly. The chimney sweep wanted to be a millionaire, he abandoned his honest labor, and the universe basically punished him for it.
It perfectly aligns with deep-seated cultural anxieties about unearned wealth. We kind of like stories that punish the greedy.
We do. It feels satisfying.
But logistically, this starts to fall apart the absolute second you apply any modern critical thinking to it.
Oh, completely.
I mean, think about the mechanics of a society. Let's bring this into the modern day for you listening right now. Imagine if overnight, literally every single person you interact with.
Like your barista, right?
Yeah. Your barista, the construction worker fixing the pothole on your street, your kid's math teacher. Imagine if they suddenly abandoned their jobs to day trade millions of dollars in unreleased, highly exclusive luxury sneakers.
It's just utter chaos.
Right. And not just trading them, but taking out second mortgages to bet on sneakers that haven't even been manufactured yet. A society simply cannot function if the baker is busy leveraging his bakery to buy a shoe.
Because the bread wouldn't get baked.
Exactly.
The infrastructure of daily life would collapse long before the financial market ever did. Yeah. And this logical inconsistency is the thread that historian Anne Goldgar started pulling on.
So glad she did.
Yeah, because after centuries of economists repeating this apocalyptic story to warn against market bubbles, Goldgar's rigorous archival research reveals a starkly different reality.
So what does she find?
Well, the suicides in the canals, the nationwide bankruptcy, the chimney sweeps trading mansions. The archival evidence simply does not support it.
Wow. So we have a legend that is largely fabricated. But to understand how that fabrication took root and what the actual kernel of truth was, we have to look at the object of desire itself.
The tulip.
Because the tulip was not just some generic flower you could pick up at a grocery store checkout aisle.
Far from it. We have to trace the genuine origins of the tulips in Europe. Because they were not native to the Netherlands.
Right.
They actually originated in the mountain ranges of Central Asia and were heavily cultivated by the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so they were exotic.
Very. In the courts of Constantinople, under rulers like Suleiman the Magnificent, the tulip was deeply revered. It was a symbol of cultivated beauty, wealth, and divine perfection.
Which is wild, and the word tulip actually derives from a Persian word for turban, based on the shape of the flower, right?
Yeah, that is the widely accepted etymology. It
Yeah.
stems from European ambassadors who visited the Ottoman courts in the 16th century and brought the bulbs back with them.
And then they ended up in Holland.
Right. When they finally made their way into the gardens of the Dutch elite, particularly through the work of botanist Carolus Clusius at the University of Leiden, they really retained that exotic, majestic prestige.
Got it.
And remember, the Netherlands had suddenly become incredibly wealthy, and the newly rich merchant class needed ways to display their status.
So having a rare exotic flower in your garden in 1630 was basically the equivalent of parking a hypercar in your driveway today.
Oh, absolutely.
It signaled that you had vast disposable income and, more importantly, that you had refined worldly taste.
Yes. And the absolute pinnacle of this luxury, like the rarest of the rare, was what they called the broken tulip.
The broken tulip.
Right. So most standard tulips bloomed in solid, uniform colors, like red, yellow, white. But broken tulips exhibited incredibly vivid, striking, flame-like streaks of contrasting colors painted all across their petals.
They look almost like feathers, right? Or like someone took a paintbrush loaded with crimson ink and just flicked it across a pure white canvas.
That's a perfect description.
Yeah.
And the most coveted of all these broken varieties was the legendary Semper Augustus.
Semper Augustus.
Yeah, it was a pure white tulip, just aggressively slashed with deep blood-red flames. At the height of the craze, there were only a tiny handful of Semper Augustus bulbs known to exist in the entire country.
So the scarcity was immense.
Exactly.
Which brings us to what I think is the most fascinating, bizarre biological twist in this entire story.
Oh, this part is incredible.
Right, those beautiful million-dollar flame streaks, the ones driving the wealthiest men in Holland to part with absolute fortunes, they were not the result of brilliant, calculated agricultural breeding.
No, not at all. They were the visible symptoms of a disease.
A disease.
Yeah, a mosaic virus, specifically a potty-virus, transmitted by aphids, which are these tiny insects that fed on the sap of the plants.
The mechanics of this virus are just incredible. From what the sources detail, the virus basically infiltrates the plant cells and actually suppresses the anthocyanin.
Right, the pigment overlay.
Yeah, the pigment overlay in the petals. So if a tulip has a white base color and a red overlay, the virus literally breaks the red pigment, revealing the white beneath it in these chaotic, beautiful streaks.
It creates a breathtaking aesthetic, sure, but the virus is simultaneously attacking the biological integrity of the plant.
Oh, wow.
While it's making the flower unimaginably beautiful, it is fundamentally weakening the bulb. A diseased bulb produces fewer offsets, the little baby bulbs that allow the plant to propagate.
Right.
And it becomes increasingly frail with each passing year. Eventually, the bulb simply withers and dies. So the scarcity of the market was literally driven by a fatal botanical disease.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this absurdity.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I'm hearing you correctly, this would be akin to watching a room full of billionaires fiercely bidding at Sotheby's for a priceless, one-of-a-kind masterpiece painting, while fully, completely knowing that the canvas has been coated in a corrosive acid that is actively dissolving the art into dust as they bid on it?
Basically, yes.
Why on earth would sophisticated merchants build a financial empire on an asset that is biologically doomed to disappear?
Well, if you view it purely as a long-term buy-and-hold investment strategy, it is entirely irrational.
Obviously.
But the Dutch merchants were operating on a different timeline. In the short term, it was about prestige, social capital, and really the sheer thrill of the trade.
Ah, I see.
You didn't necessarily need the bulb to live for 20 years. You just needed it to live long enough to impress your peers or to sell it to the next buyer at a huge premium.
Which introduces the next massive logistical hurdle of the tulip market.
Right, the biological clock.
A very strict biological clock, because you cannot simply dig up a tulip bulb whenever you please.
No, they have a very specific growth cycle. You can only safely lift a bulb from the dirt and physically hand it to someone during its brief summer dormancy period.
Which is usually between June and September.
Exactly.
Because if you try to dig up a propagating bulb in December, you kill it instantly.
Right, so we have a market frenzy that is absolutely peaking in the dead of winter, specifically late 1636 and early 1637.
When the ground is frozen solid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The physical bulbs are buried safely under the frozen earth. You cannot see them, you cannot inspect them, and you certainly cannot physically hand them to a buyer.
So how are they executing these trades? If I can't give you the flower, what exactly am I selling you?
They were executing futures contracts. You were buying the promise that when summer arrived, a specific named bulb would be dug up and delivered to you.
Just a promise.
Just a promise. And the Dutch recognized the inherent intangibility of this system. They had a wonderfully poetic and slightly cynical name for it. Wind handle.
The wind trade.
They were trading wind. They were trading promises, concepts, and air rather than physical possessions.
Wow.
And to understand how radical this was, we have to look at the mechanics of where and how this wind handle actually took place.
Because the Dutch Republic already had a formal stock exchange,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yeah. They had a highly sophisticated formal stock exchange in Amsterdam. They were trading shares in the Dutch East India Company. It was heavily regulated and very serious.
But the tulip traders weren't allowed on the formal exchange, were they?
No. The formal magistrates viewed the tulip trade as far too volatile and speculative. So wind handle was pushed into the back rooms of taverns.
Of course it was.
Traders formed ad hoc groups called colleges. You would walk into a noisy, smoke-filled pub, sit around a sticky wooden table, drink heavily, and negotiate the future price of a diseased flower buried 10 miles away in the frozen dirt.
I am trying to visualize the logistics of a tavern futures market. I mean, if there is no central clearinghouse, no formal exchange, how are they recording these trades?
Very loosely.
What stops someone from just lying?
Well, the governance of these tavern colleges was incredibly informal. It was largely based on social pressure and highly localized rituals.
Okay.
The deals were often negotiated via a complex system involving wooden chalkboards or verbal bidding, which was overseen by a mediator within the college.
And when a price was finally agreed upon,
The deal was sealed not with collateral, but with a small fee called wine money, the wine coup.
which was just a mandated tip to pay for the drinks.
Effectively, yes.
Right.
The buyer did not have to post margin. They didn't have to prove they had the funds sitting in a bank.
That is wild.
And conversely, the seller did not necessarily have to prove they actually possessed the bulb they were promising to deliver.
It is exactly like day trading NFTs in a pub.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Think about the modern parallels. It is like buying a non-fungible tulip on a decentralized app, except your digital ledger is just a slate chalkboard that someone is going to wipe clean at the end of the night.
Right.
And your proof of ownership is literally a handshake with a guy named Henrik who has just consumed 4 pints of ale.
Exactly.
How could a system built on zero collateral, trading an asset that is actively dying, sustain itself?
The fundamental answer is that it could not sustain itself.
Unsurprised.
Yeah. The mechanics of a collateral-free futures market heavily incentivize pure speculation. The system allowed people to buy contracts they couldn't afford, hoping to flip the contract to a new buyer before the summer delivery date ever arrived.
So it's just a giant game of musical chairs.
Exactly.
So there genuinely was a bubble. The legend isn't entirely fabricated.
No, the extreme escalation of prices for the rarest bulbs during that specific winter was very real. Contracts for the most coveted varieties were genuinely changing hands for the equivalent value of a fine canal house.
Wow.
The nature of the crash and the aftermath diverges wildly from the myth.
Okay, so walk us through the day the music stopped. If they are just trading paper promises, what triggers the actual panic?
The tipping point occurs in early February 1637. This is during a routine tavern auction in the city of Haarlem.
Okay.
A seller offers a batch of bulbs at a high price, and nobody bids.
Oh.
He lowers the price. Still, silence in the tavern. For the first time in months, the perpetual upward momentum just halts.
The bubble pops.
The realization washes over the room that there are no more greater fools willing to pay a higher price. The panic spreads from that single tavern in Haarlem outward to all the other colleges.
And how fast does it crash?
Within a matter of weeks, the theoretical paper value of these contracts plummets by over 90%.
A 90% drop in a matter of weeks. Logically, I mean, that is where the mass bankruptcies and the suicides should happen.
You would think so.
If my portfolio drops 90%, I am ruined.
And that assumption is exactly why Charles Mackay's narrative was accepted for so long. It feels logically sound. But this is the crucial juncture where Anne Goldgar's archival work basically rewrites history.
What does she do?
Goldgar did something astonishingly tedious and brilliant. She spent years cross-referencing the names of known tulip traders against the municipal records of the Dutch cities from the 1630s.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of work.
Tons of work. She looked at court records, bankruptcy filings, notary documents, property deeds, wills.
She basically tracked the actual human beings behind the trades to see what happened to their money.
Exactly. She did the granular detective work that previous historians just skipped. And her first major discovery was the demographics of the traders.
Who were they?
It was not a democratic frenzy.
Yeah.
There were no chimney sweeps or bakers abandoning their posts.
None of that was true.
None of it. Participation in the win handle was largely restricted to a few hundred wealthy individuals, mostly merchants, wealthy artisans like the textile weavers in Haarlem, and local magistrates.
Right.
They were a tight-knit circle of men who already knew each other through business or family ties.
So the blast radius of the crash was incredibly contained. It wasn't a national crisis at all. It was basically a really bad month for a specific country club.
Precisely. But the second, and far more shocking discovery Goldgar made was regarding the financial fallout.
Okay.
When she looked to the bankruptcies, she couldn't find them.
Wait, how is that mathematically possible? If a wealthy merchant buys a contract for 10,000 guilders and the value drops to 1,000, he owes a massive debt.
But he only owes a massive debt if the contract is strictly enforced by the state.
Oh.
We have to look at how the Dutch legal system viewed the win handle. Because these contracts were made in taverns without collateral, the courts viewed them with extreme skepticism.
They didn't take them seriously.
Not at all.
They
They frequently classified them as gambling debts. And in 17th century Dutch law, gambling debts were very difficult to enforce in a court of law.
Oh. Because no one had fronted the cash in the winter, when summer came and it was time to dig up the bulb and actually hand over the money, the buyer could just refuse.
Exactly. The buyer simply looked at the seller and said, "I am not paying you the inflated winter price for a bulb that is now worthless."
And the seller couldn't do anything about it.
Because the seller couldn't easily drag the buyer to court, they had to rely on local arbiters. So the vast majority of these contracts were settled for pennies on the dollar.
Wow.
A buyer might pay 5% of the original contract price just to make the headache go away.
Hmm.
And the seller accepted it because 5% was better than zero.
Right.
The money hadn't physically moved during the winter. It was purely hypothetical wealth that simply evaporated.
And what about McKay's claim of ruined men drowning themselves in the canals?
Goldgar scoured the death records and municipal logs. There is not a single documented contemporary case of a suicide connected to the Tulip crash.
Not one.
Not a single one. The Dutch economy as a whole, the shipping, the textile trade, the spice, imports, it all sailed on entirely intact, unbothered by the collapse of a tavern-based futures market.
This shifts the entire paradigm of the story. I mean, if nobody is losing their homes and the economy's fine, why was it remembered as a crisis at all? Did anyone actually care?
Oh, the people involved cared deeply.
Mm.
But not because of macroeconomic collapse. The true casualty of the Tulip Mania crash was a profound cultural wound.
A cultural wound.
Yes, it was a localized but devastating blow to the Dutch code of honor.
The honor system.
Exactly. The concept of vertrouwen, or trust. 17th century Dutch merchant society was deeply dependent on reputation and personal word.
Because they didn't have, like, digital contracts.
Right. They were managing a sprawling global empire before the invention of instant communication or sophisticated international commercial law. The entire system functioned because people believed that if the Dutch merchant shook your hand and made a promise, he would honor it, even if he took a loss.
Your reputation was literally your currency.
When the tulip market crashed, these men who went to the same churches, whose families intermarried, who sat on the same civic boards, suddenly realized that their peers would happily break a solemn handshake agreement just to save their own wallets.
Wow. The realization that greed could override honor among your own friends. That is fascinating.
It was devastating for them.
The reality is actually a story about hurt feelings and a shattered social contract rather than mass poverty. It kind of reminds me of being in a high-stakes fantasy football league with your oldest friends.
Wait, how so?
Well, let's say 10 friends agree the buy-in is $1,000 each, right? But nobody actually collects the cash up front in August. We all just shake on it.
Okay, I see where you're going.
The season plays out. In January, the guy who comes in last place just straight up refuses to pay out. He deletes the app and stops answering texts.
Oh, wow.
Right. Now, nobody is going to go bankrupt over the $1,000. Nobody is losing their home. But that friend group is permanently fractured.
The trust is totally gone.
Exactly. You will never view that person the same way again. The actual tulip crash was basically a massive, localized destruction of the vibe.
The destruction of the vibe. I love that. Yeah, the social fabric of that specific merchant class was briefly, deeply torn.
Yeah.
But your analogy raises the most important question of this entire deep dive.
Which is?
If the reality was just a localized fracturing of trust among a few hundred merchants, where did Charles Mackay get the chimney sweeps and the national apocalypse?
Right. If the historical records show absolutely no bankruptcies, what sources was Mackay even reading in 1841 to write his book?
To answer that, we have to look at the immediate aftermath of the crash in 1637, and really the birth of the myth machine. In the months following the Harlem auction failure, there was this massive explosion of cheap, printed pamphlets distributed throughout the Dutch Republic.
Like little newsletters.
Yeah, these highly illustrated, dramatically written tracts. But they were not journalistic accounts or objective economic reports. They were satirical, moralizing propaganda.
Propaganda against who?
Against the speculators. You have to remember, Dutch society was heavily influenced by Calvinism.
Right.
It's a branch of Protestantism that highly valued hard work, thrift, and modesty. So the very concept of wind handle, of men trying to generate massive wealth purely by moving paper around a tavern table without producing any tangible good or engaging in honest physical labor.
It went against everything they believed in.
Exactly. It was viewed as a literal sin against God.
So religious authorities and moralists start writing pamphlets to shame the traders.
They wrote these hyperbolic satires designed explicitly to mock the greed of the speculators. They created allegorical cartoons, like the famous Flora's Car of Fools, depicting the goddess of flowers leading greedy men into the sea.
Oh, wow.
They invented the characters of the foolish weavers abandoning their looms, and yes, they invented the story of the chimney sweep, to mock the idea of the lower classes trying to rise above their divinely appointed station.
So it was essentially 17th century comedy meant to teach moral lesson.
It was intended to be read as allegory and satire. But 200 years later, Charles Mackay, this Victorian journalist who's looking for sensational stories about the madness of crowds, picks up these Dutch pamphlets.
And he thinks they're real.
He either doesn't understand the cultural context of Calvinist satire, or he simply doesn't care because the narrative is just too juicy.
Oh my gosh.
He translates these satirical characters, the chimney sweep, the baker, and presents them to his 19th century audience as sober, objective, documented historical fact.
I am genuinely astounded by this historical game of telephone. Think about what this means. It would be exactly as if historians 200 years from now, in the year 2226, tried to reconstruct and understand the nuances of early 21st century global politics, purely by finding an archived server of The Onion.
That's entirely what it is.
And treating every single satirical, absurd headline as a peer-reviewed, documented historical record. Ah, yes, according to the archives, the president did indeed throw a tantrum and eat a vital peace treaty.
Right. It highlights an incredible danger in historical interpretation, because the most famous financial bubble in human history, the one taught in universities around the world, is built on a foundation of 17th century religious satire.
Wow.
Scooped up by a 19th century Victorian writer who couldn't resist a good story, and then repeated uncritically by economists ever since.
Which brings me back to the listener. I mean, think about how often you hear the phrase Tulip Mania invoked in modern media.
Constantly.
It is an absolute staple of financial journalism. Every time a market gets volatile, Hal, out comes the tulip analogy.
Yeah, for sure.
During the dot-com crash in the late 90s, pundits screamed Tulip Mania. During the housing crisis in 2008, Tulip Mania. Whenever Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency surges in value, the immediate headline is, it's Tulip Mania 2.0.
And that begs the ultimate question, doesn't it? If historians like Anne Goldgar have painstakingly proven that the legend is false, why do we keep replanting it? Why does this specific myth refuse to die?
It has to be because the myth is useful to us.
It is incredibly useful. It is a perfectly packaged, easily digestible parable. But more importantly, as Goldgar brilliantly argues, it survives because it is flattering to modern audiences.
Wait, how does a story about people losing their minds over a flower flatter us?
Because when we hear the story of the foolish 17th century Dutchman trading his beautiful mansion for a root vegetable, we get to laugh at him.
Ah, we get to feel superior.
Exactly. We get an inherent sense of superiority. We soothe ourselves by thinking that we are modern, rational, sophisticated investors who would never fall for such obvious hysteria.
Right.
The myth survives not because it accurately reflects 1637, but because it perfectly encapsulates our ongoing modern anxieties.
Anxieties about what specifically?
About new money, about the terrifying, unpredictable power of crowd psychology, and about the deep-seated dread of losing our own rationality to a market frenzy.
That makes so much sense.
When a new, incomprehensible technology or asset class emerges, like the early internet or decentralized digital currency, it makes the financial establishment profoundly anxious. And the Tulip Mania myth provides a comforting, familiar narrative template to map onto that anxiety.
We use the myth to domesticate our fear. When we don't understand Bitcoin, we just say, oh, I've seen this movie before, it's just tulips.
Yeah.
It gives us a false sense of control over the unpredictable.
Exactly. We prefer the neat, moralizing narrative of the myth over the messy, nuanced reality of history.
Usually when we do a deep dive into the archives, the central theme is that we brush away the dirt to uncover a brilliant historical signal that was lost to time.
Right.
But the dynamic here is completely inverted. The false echo, the satirical myth, grew so incredibly loud, so beautifully constructed, and so deeply satisfying to our sense of morality that it intentionally and systematically smothered the real story.
Because the truth, a beautiful but diseased flower, a tavern market running on uncollateralized wind, and a localized crisis of merchant honor was simply too dull, or perhaps too complex, to serve as a catchy warning label for modern economists.
So the world collectively decided to print the legend instead.
And through sheer repetition, the legend became unquestioned fact.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to summarize the genuinely incredible journey we've taken through these sources. We started by breaking down the biological reality of the tulip itself, a mosaic virus transmitted by aphids that painted beautiful, fatal flames onto the petals.
Simultaneously creating and killing the most expensive botanical asset in history.
Exactly. From there, we stepped into the smoky, beer-soaked taverns of the Dutch Republic to understand Windhandle, a proto-derivatives market of futures contracts governed by nothing more than chalkboards and a really fragile honor system.
And finally, we arrived at the startling realization that the apocalyptic fallout of the world's most famous economic disaster was mostly invented by 17th century Calvinist satirists and amplified by a gullible Victorian journalist.
The majestic Semper Augustus, the white and crimson flower that supposedly brought an empire to its knees, doesn't even exist anymore. It went extinct centuries ago, consumed by the very virus that made it famous.
It survives today only in old, faded oil paintings.
And in a cautionary tale that isn't even true.
Which leaves us with a final and, frankly, a very unsettling thought to mull over.
What's that?
We've just spent a significant amount of time deconstructing how one of the most famously cited, universally accepted facts of financial history is, at its core, a tall tale that managed to outshout the truth.
Yeah.
If a myth that large can be accepted as historical gospel by generations of experts, we have to ask ourselves, what else are we perfectly certain about today that is entirely wrong? I challenge you to look at today's headlines, to watch the financial news, and ask yourself, which of the economic panics, which of the social frenzies we're living through right this very second, will be recorded as absolute historical fact by generations, hundreds of years from now, simply because the media managed to spin really, really good story about it.
That is a brilliant point. And as you watch those modern narratives unfold, and as pundits confidently point to the latest chart to declare that the sky is falling, just remember that somewhere, hidden deep in the murky waters of history, there is a sailor happily eating his pickled herring, completely unaware that his lunch is about to become a legend.